The man looked at her for 11 seconds. Clara counted. She had learned, in 34 years of being looked at and found wanting, to count the seconds so she would have something precise to hold on to when the looking stopped. 11 seconds. Then Edmund Greer turned his horse around and rode back the way he had come, without a word, without a glance back, without the common decency of a goodbye. He had ordered her from a catalog the way a man orders a new saddle, and like a saddle that didn't fit, he had simply returned her. She sat back down on her trunk. The platform boards were hot beneath her. The Texas sun was the kind of merciless that felt personal. Somewhere behind her, the station master was pretending he hadn't seen any of it. Clara Whitfield pressed both palms flat against the trunk, looked at the empty tracks, and told herself she would not cry. She did not cry. If this story is already in your chest, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now let's go back to Texas. Summer of 1888. And a woman who just got thrown away like she was nothing, who had no idea she was about to change everything. Elias Calhoun was reaching for a bag of nails when Walt Briley stepped into the doorway of the supply room and said, "There's a woman on the platform. Been there since 8:30. I don't know what to do with her." Elias did not look up. "Not my problem, Walt." "Edmund Greer sent for her. Mail-order bride. Came in on the morning train." Walt paused. "He rode off without her 2 hours ago." Elias's hand stopped on the nail bag. Said she wasn't what the photograph suggested. Walt's voice had gone flat, with the particular flatness of a man who had witnessed something shameful and had nowhere to put it. Said she was older than he'd bargained for. Said he'd already made other arrangements. He left her here. Left her standing on that platform with her trunk and her good dress and not so much as a sorry ma'am. Walt looked at the floor. She ain't moved since. Won't come inside. Won't take water. Just sitting there, staring at the tracks. Elias set the nail bag down. He told himself he was just going to look. He came around the corner of the station building, and he saw her. She was sitting on top of a heavy trunk at the far end of the platform, back straight, hands folded in her lap, chin level. Not looking at anything in particular, just holding herself upright, with the careful, deliberate composure of someone who knew they were being watched and had decided, a long time ago, that they would never give anyone the satisfaction of seeing them fold. He had worn that same posture himself for 4 years, since the morning he had walked out of the room where Rebecca died, and kept walking, because stopping meant letting himself feel the full weight of it, and the full weight of it would have put him on the ground, and he was not sure he would have gotten back up. He recognized it the way you recognized a scar on someone else's hand. Same wound, different story. He walked toward her. She did not look up until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that his shadow fell across her face and gave her a strip of shade against the brutal August sun. When she looked up, her eyes were gray. Not soft gray, not gentle. Hard and clear and precise, like river stone worn smooth by years of cold water. The eyes of a woman who had spent a long time watching people and drawing accurate conclusions from what she saw. "I am waiting for Thursday's train," she said. Her voice was steady in a way that took effort. He could hear the effort, faint as a hairline crack in good china. "Thursday is 4 days off." He took his hat off. His mother had raised him to do that, and some habits were deeper than grief. "You got somewhere to go when it comes?" Something moved behind her eyes. A flicker, gone before it landed. "I have options." She was lying. He could tell because she held his gaze too steady when she said it, the way people did when they were trying to make a lie look like confidence. He had told the same lie himself every time someone asked if he was managing fine, for 2 full years after the funeral. Elias Calhoun. He held his hat in both hands. I run a ranch 9 miles north. Not a large operation, but honest work. He watched her face. My account books have been a wreck for 18 months. I've been losing money I can't account for, and I need someone who can read a ledger and tell me why the numbers don't add up. She blinked. That she had not expected. Can you read a balance sheet? Silence. She looked at him with that precise, measuring gaze, not reading his face for kindness, he realized, but for the lie, the trap, the hidden thing. I was a legal accounts clerk in Philadelphia for 9 years, she said finally. Then that's what I need. He put his hat back on. I'll pay fair wages. You can cook and keep house too, if that's what you're used to. But what I actually need is someone who knows what a fraudulent invoice looks like. Why would you have fraudulent invoices? That, Elias said, is exactly what I need you to find out. She stood up. She was taller than he'd expected, nearly reached his shoulder, and she moved with the economy of someone whose body knew work and had no patience for ceremony. She picked up the small traveling bag beside the trunk, tucked it under her arm. Clara Whitfield, she said. Ma'am, since you gave me yours. She looked at the trunk. You'll need to take the other end. He reached down. The leather handle was hot from the sun, worn smooth with years of use. He lifted his end. She lifted hers. They carried it to the wagon together, without another word. The road north was bad. Drought had cracked it into patterns that looked like the surface of something old and broken, and the horses moved through it with the resigned patience of animals that had given up expecting better. Clara sat on the far edge of the bench seat, her traveling bag in her lap, her eyes moving across the landscape the way hands move across a map. Not admiring, assessing. The cattle on the east fence, she said, 20 minutes into the ride. Their ribs are showing. I know it. How long since the creek ran? June. And the well? Going. He kept his eyes on the road, hauling from a spring 2 miles south, twice a day. Spring's dropping too. And your foreman, does he know the situation? Something shifted in the set of Elias's jaw. A small shift. Just enough. Tom Aldous has been with me 6 years. He knows the operation. Clara said nothing. She turned her eyes back to the road. But she had caught the shift, and she filed it away without commenting, the way she had learned to file things, quietly, precisely, for later. The ranch house came into view on the rise. She looked at it without expression. The weathered silver boards, the listing porch, the motionless windmill, the barn with the repaired roof, the garden plot gone to cracked earth. Her eyes moved across it in one sweep, then settled on the porch railing. Elias watched her see it. Along the railing, between the posts, there were 6 square holes in the wood where something had been removed. Not recently. The wood around the holes had weathered to the same silver as everything else. But the holes were there, deliberate, evenly spaced, the ghost of something that had once lined the whole front of the house. Clara did not ask about the holes. She climbed down from the wagon before he could come around, picked up her traveling bag, and went up the porch steps. "Where are the ledgers?" she said, hand on the screen door. "Study. First door left." He looked at the 6 holes in the railing. He had not looked at them directly in 2 years. Rebecca had planted climbing roses there the first summer they were married, had coaxed them up the posts, and trained them along the rail all the way to the corner. Pink flowers in July. The smell of them every morning when he brought her coffee on the porch. He had dug them up the August after she died. He couldn't look at them anymore. He still couldn't look at the holes. "Mr. Calhoun," Clara's voice from the doorway, "I'll need a lamp. The study window faces north. He pulled his eyes off the railing. I'll bring one. He stood there one more second after she went inside. Just one. Then he tied the horses to the rail and went to find the lamp and told himself that the burning behind his sternum was just the heat. Clara had both ledgers open on the desk and the invoice pile sorted into 2 stacks before he brought the lamp in. He set it down without comment. She did not look up. He went to check on the cattle and came back 40 minutes later with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his shoulders, and found her still at the desk, 3 ledgers now, the invoice pile fully sorted, a piece of paper beside her left hand covered in her own handwriting. A column of numbers, neat and small and damning. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "The early records are clean." She turned the first ledger toward him and pointed to entries from 6 and 7 years back. Every purchase recorded accurately, every sale noted, every debt tracked and cleared on schedule. "This is the work of a careful man, Mr. Calhoun." "My father kept those." She nodded once. "The records stay clean for the first 4 years after you take over. Then," she moved her finger to a page from 2 years ago, "they begin to change. Not dramatically, not in a way you'd catch without looking closely. Small discrepancies. Supply invoices that don't match delivery records. A water assessment fee that appears every 3 months with no county documentation in the file." She set her finger on a line entry. "Southwestern Territorial Holdings, $312, quarterly. Water rights assessment. County levied it 2 years ago." "Mr. Calhoun." She kept her voice even, steady. "May I see the county document for this charge?" He found it in the bottom drawer. She unfolded it on the desk, read it, turned it over, read the back, set it flat. The silence in the study was the kind that has weight. "This was not issued by Presidio County," she said. "What?" "The seal is wrong. Presidio County uses a 3-ring seal. This is 2 rings." She turned the document to face him. "And the registrar's signature at the bottom? I have processed enough county documentation to know what a registrar's signature looks like. This is not one." Elias stared at the document. She watched the understanding move through him. Not fast, not dramatic, but steady and thorough, like floodwater finding every low place in a field. 12 payments, he said. $3,744. She did not hesitate on the number. Paid to a company that, based on this document, has no legal standing to collect it. He looked up from the paper. His face was controlled. She was learning to read the control, to see the things moving underneath it. The jaw set tight. The stillness in the hands that meant the hands wanted to do something, but had been told to stay still. "Tom Aldis handled the books last fall," he said, "when I moved the herd south." "And the fall before?" A pause, longer than the last one. "Same." Then Tom Aldis received these invoices, processed these payments. She kept her voice level. She was not accusing. She was presenting arithmetic. Either he was deceived, or he was not. Elias stood up. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the yard, at the barn, at the fence line beyond it where Tom Aldis was, at this moment, replacing a post on the south pasture boundary. His shoulders were rigid under his shirt. "Tom's been with me 6 years, he said. "I know. He was at my wife's funeral. He helped me dig the grave." His voice was quiet, not angry, something worse than angry. The voice of a man confronting a betrayal from a direction he had not thought to guard. "He sat with me the first winter after, when I wasn't," When I couldn't... He stopped. Clara waited. He stayed, Elias said. When everyone else went home, Tom stayed. I understand. And she did. She understood it precisely, the way you understood a type of pain you had felt, in a different shape. The specific devastation of being betrayed by someone who had stayed. I'm not telling you what happened. I don't know yet. What I'm telling you is what the documents show. And I need to see the actual county records in Harlan before I can tell you anything more definitive. He turned from the window. The lamplight caught his face, the lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth, the particular exhaustion of a man who had been holding too much weight for too long, and had just had more added. How bad is it? He said. All of it. How bad? She looked at the column of numbers on her notepad, at the 14 flagged entries she had not yet fully examined, at the fraudulent document lying between them on the desk. I don't know yet, she said, but I believe someone has been deliberately draining this ranch, slowly, carefully, in amounts small enough that you wouldn't catch them without looking for them specifically. Holt. You believe Reginald Holt is behind this? I believe Reginald Holt wants this land and has wanted it for 3 years, and is not a man who waits politely for what he wants. Elias sat back down. His hands were flat on the desk now, on either side of the ledger, and they were not quite steady. He looked at them for a moment, like he was noticing that himself. He's been buying up land in this county for 15 years. Every drought, every bad winter, every family that gets desperate enough. He moves in with a number that sounds like mercy and is actually just a different kind of theft. Does he have connections in the county records office? Elias looked at her. Why? Because if those records have been altered, if he has someone in that office who can change what's on file to match the fraudulent documents, then this goes beyond Tom Aldous. This is a system, built over time, with more than one person involved. She held his gaze. And if that's what we find in Harlan, Mr. Calhoun, it will not be enough to simply expose it. We will need to build a case that cannot be dismantled by the same people who built the fraud. The silence stretched between them. You've done this before, Elias said. I found the same pattern in a Philadelphia law office. She kept her voice flat. Fabricated assessments, altered records, money leaving accounts through charges that looked legitimate if you didn't know what legitimate looked like. She paused. I reported it. The senior partner told the Bar Association I had fabricated the evidence. I was 26 years old, with no family, no money, and no one who would take my word over his. She looked at the ledger. The Bar Association believed him. But you were right. I was right. And the firm continued operating for 3 more years before someone else found what I found, with enough standing to make it stick. She picked up her pen. I will not let that happen again. Elias watched her for a long moment. This woman who had been left on a train platform that morning like something returned, who had walked into his study and in 40 minutes found what he had missed for 2 years, who was sitting in his dead wife's chair with her jaw set and her pen in her hand, and her entire history laid out on the desk between them like a second set of documents. We leave for Harlan at dawn, he said. Good. She pulled the ledger back toward her. Then I have 4 more hours of work to do tonight. He stood, picked up his hat, moved to the doorway. Mr. Calhoun. She did not look up from the page. He stopped. Those holes in the porch railing. Her voice was careful. What did you take down? He was quiet for a long moment. Roses, he said. My wife planted them. He put his hat on. Breakfast is at 5. He walked down the hall. The screen door opened. Closed. Clara sat alone in the lamplight. The ledgers spread around her, the column of numbers on her notepad, the fraudulent document lying at the edge of the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the pen in her hand, at the ink on her fingers, at the 9 years of work that had been taken from her, and the 34 years that had led her to a railway platform in Texas, and a man who kept holes in his porch railing instead of filling them. She pulled the ledger open to page 15. She had not come this far to stop now. The wagon rolled out before the sun cleared the eastern hills, while the sky was still the dark blue of something not yet decided. Clara sat beside Elias, with a fraudulent document folded inside her traveling bag and 14 pages of handwritten notes pressed flat against her knee. She had slept 3 hours. She did not mention this. Neither did he, though she suspected he had slept less. They rode the first mile in silence, not the uncomfortable silence of strangers. Something different had settled between them overnight. Something that came from sitting across a desk from another person while they methodically dismantled 2 years of your financial assumptions. It was the silence of people who had already said the hard things and were now simply moving toward whatever came next. Tom Aldous, Clara said. The name had been sitting in her mouth since 4 in the morning. When did he start handling the books? Elias kept his eyes on the road. Fall of '86. My wife was sick. I couldn't be in 2 places. A pause. Tom said he'd manage the paperwork while I managed everything else. And you trusted him? I trusted him. Has he ever given you reason not to? The pause this time was longer, more deliberate. 6 months ago, I found a supply invoice from the feed store that didn't match what we'd received. $12 short. Tom said it was a billing error. I let it go. $12, Clara said. I know how it sounds. It sounds like someone testing how closely you were watching. She looked at the road ahead. Small enough to dismiss, large enough to note if you were keeping track. She paused. Were there others like it? Maybe. His jaw worked. I didn't keep track. I did, she said. Last night. There are 9 separate instances of small discrepancies, between $4 and $18 each, in the 18 months before the Southwestern Territorial Holdings charges began. 9 tests, Mr. Calhoun. 9 times someone checked whether you were paying attention. Elias said nothing for a long moment. The horses moved through the early morning with their heads low, breathing steadily, their hooves raising small puffs of pale dust. How long would it take to build a case? He said finally. A real one. The kind that holds. That depends on what we find in Harlan. She kept her voice even. If the county records show the legitimate assessments and they don't match what's in your ledger, we have documentary proof of fraud. We take that to a federal land office, not a county one. County offices can be compromised. Federal offices are harder. We request an audit of all Southwestern Territorial Holdings transactions in Presidio County. She paused. And we do it before Holt finds out we're looking. He'll find out. Eventually. The question is whether we have enough in hand before he does. She turned to look at Elias directly. How many other ranchers in this county have you heard complain about assessment fees in the last 2 years? He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. The particular look of a man whose separate pieces of information were suddenly arranging themselves into a picture he had not seen before. Marcus Dean's been talking about fees going up. And the Shelby family. They sold out last spring, said the land costs had gotten impossible to manage. Did they sell to Holt? The silence that followed was its own answer. How many ranches has Holt bought in the last 2 years? 4 that I know of. His voice was flat now, the flatness of controlled anger. maybe more. Then this is not just your ledger, Mr. Calhoun. She turned back to the road. This is a pattern, and patterns are easier to prove than individual incidents. Harlan was a town that had survived a great deal and showed it in the way things that survive showed it. Weathered, patched, functional, stripped of any quality that wasn't strictly necessary. The county records office sat on the main street between a dry goods merchant and a lawyer's office with peeling gold lettering on the window. A squat building of pale stone with a single wooden door and a sign that needed repainting. Clara went in first. Elias followed. The clerk behind the counter was a young man, barely 20, with ink-stained fingers and the slightly harassed look of someone who spent his days being asked to locate things that other people had misfiled. He looked up when they came in, then looked at Elias, then looked at Clara, and settled on an expression of cautious neutrality. "We need to see the water assessment records for Presidio County," Clara said. "Specifically, all filings under the Southwestern Territorial Holdings account, going back 24 months. The clerk blinked. "Ma'am, those records they're public record, sure enough, but—" "I know they're public record." She set her traveling bag on the counter and removed the document Elias had given her. "I also need to see the original county assessments for the Calhoun Ranch on the North Road. The actual county-issued documents on file here, not copies." The clerk looked at Elias again. "Sir, is she with you?" "She is," Elias said. "She's asking for a considerable amount of records." "Then you'd better start pulling them," Elias said, in a tone that suggested the conversation was already finished. The clerk pulled the records. Clara stood at the counter and read every page with the focused stillness of a woman who had spent 9 years turning documents into information. Elias stood beside her, a little back, close enough to see what she was seeing, saying nothing. He had learned, in the last 30 minutes of watching her work, that she did not need commentary. She needed quiet, and she needed the documents, and she would tell him what mattered when she had finished. She found it on the 7th page. "Mr. Calhoun," her voice was very controlled. "Look at this." He leaned forward. It was a water assessment filing from 18 months ago. Official seal, registrar's signature, county file number. Everything correct. Everything legitimate. The charge listed was $48 annually. He looked at it. Looked at the document from his own files. The document in his files listed $312 quarterly. The silence between them was not the comfortable silence of the early morning ride. This was the silence of a number that didn't fit, hanging in the air between two people who understood exactly what it meant. "Someone filed a document with your ranch," Clara said quietly, "that bears no relation to what is actually on record with this county." She turned to the clerk, who had been pretending to file papers at the far end of the counter, with the transparent anxiety of someone who could feel that something significant was happening and wanted no part of it. "I need to see every Southwestern Territorial Holdings filing in this office. Every single one." "Ma'am, that could take—" "I have time." She set both documents side by side on the counter. "And I suspect you'll want to know what I'm finding just as much as we do." The clerk looked at the two documents, looked at the seal on the one from Elias's files, looked at the official seal on the county document. His face changed slowly, the way a face changed when understanding arrived uninvited, and you couldn't quite shut the door on it in time. "That seal," he said, very quietly. "That ain't ours." "No," Clara said, "it is not." He pulled the Southwestern Territorial Holdings file. There were 11 ranches listed, 11 separate assessment accounts, all established within the same 4-month window. all with charges that exceeded the county's actual assessment by between 100 and 400%. 3 of those ranches had since sold. The sale prices in each case were significantly below market value. Clara wrote every number down, every name, every date. Elias stood beside her and read over her shoulder and said nothing, but she could feel the quality of his silence changing. Not louder, but denser, the way air changed before a storm. His hand on the counter beside hers had gone very still. "The name on the filing authorization," she said, "for all 11 accounts." She pointed. "It's the same signature." They both looked at it. The signature was not Reginald Holt's. It was not anyone from the county office. It was a name neither of them had expected. Daniel Price, County Water Assessor. Elias took a very slow breath. Price has been water assessor for 8 years. And he authorized all 11 fraudulent accounts. Clara folded her notes and put them in her bag. "Mr. Calhoun, do you have any relationship with Daniel Price outside of official county business?" "He's Holt's brother-in-law." The words came out with the flat, stripped quality of something that had just become obvious in retrospect, the way things always were. "Married Holt's younger sister 10 years ago." Clara picked up her bag. "We need to go. We haven't finished. We have everything we need from here, and I would like to leave before anyone who reports to Holt sees us standing at this counter." She looked at the clerk, who had the pale, slightly stricken expression of someone who had just realized the file he'd been maintaining was evidence of a crime. "Young man, these records need to stay exactly where they are. Don't refile them. Don't let anyone pull them without signing a retrieval log. And if anyone asks what we were looking at today, you tell them we were asking about grazing permit renewals." The clerk swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." She moved toward the door. Elias followed. On the street outside, the sun had climbed to mid-morning, and the town was moving around them with the ordinary business of an ordinary day. And Clara walked 3 storefronts down before she stopped beside the wall of the dry goods store and let out a breath that had been waiting since she first read the name, Daniel Price. "Tell me about Tom Aldous," she said. "Everything. Not just what he did for the ranch. Who he knows, who he drinks with, who he talks to when he's in town." Elias looked at her. "Why?" "Because Daniel Price runs the fraudulent assessments. Holt provides the money and the motive. But someone had to get those documents into your filing cabinet, Mr. Calhoun. Someone with access to your house, your study, your records." She kept her voice level. "Tom Aldous has been in your employ for 6 years. He handled your books twice while you were away. And 9 months ago, he told you a $12 discrepancy was a billing error." She looked at him directly. "You tell me what you think." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Around them, a wagon rolled past. A woman called to a child from a doorway across the street. The town kept moving, indifferent to the particular shape of the thing being dismantled, between 2 people standing against a wall of pale painted boards. "Tom knows Price," he said. "They went to school together, years back." He paused. "I knew that. I never thought about it. Does Tom know you're in Harlan today?" "He knew I was coming for supplies." A pause. "He didn't know why." "Then we need to be back before he starts wondering." She moved toward where they had left the wagon. "And we need to talk to Marcus Dean and the Shelby family, if any of them are reachable. If they'll confirm they received similar documents..." "Wait." Elias's hand closed briefly on her arm. Not forceful, just stopping her. She turned. His face was very close, and the thing she had been reading in it all morning, the controlled anger, the grief of betrayal, the exhaustion of a man who had been slowly and methodically robbed by someone he trusted, had shifted into something more complicated. "You've been awake since before 4 in the morning," he said. You haven't eaten since last night." She blinked. The observation landed with the disorienting quality of something she had genuinely not thought about. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on 4 hours of sleep and anger, and you're doing it on my behalf. And I would like to buy you a meal before we drive 9 miles back on that road." His voice was quiet, not asking exactly, not quite telling, something in between that was specific to him. "We have time. The information isn't going anywhere." She looked at him for a moment, at the lines around his eyes, at the set of his jaw, at the way he held himself, straight, controlled, the posture she recognized because she wore it herself. He had not slept either. She could see it now that she was looking for it. "All right," she said. They ate at a small table in the back of a restaurant that smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Elias ordered eggs and biscuits without looking at the menu. Clara ordered the same. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had done a significant amount of work together and had earned the right to be quiet for a moment. "In Philadelphia," Elias said, "when you reported the fraud, were you afraid?" She looked at the coffee in her cup. "I was 26 and alone, and I had no one to call if it went wrong." She paused. "So yes, I was afraid." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." She set the cup down. I genuinely believed that the truth would be sufficient, that documented proof would speak for itself." She paused. "I was wrong. Truth isn't sufficient on its own. You need truth and standing and witnesses and the right people willing to hear it. I had the truth." She looked at him. "This time, I intend to have the rest of it as well." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not assessment, not calculation, just looking at her, the way you looked at something that had surprised you, in a way you weren't sure how to name. "You didn't have to come here," he said. "I gave you a job and a room. You could have worked the books, found the discrepancies, told me what to do, and let me handle the rest." He paused. "You didn't have to sit in that records office for 2 hours and build the case yourself." "Yes, I did," she said without hesitation. "Why?" She thought about the platform boards hot under her hands that morning. About 11 seconds. About a Philadelphia courtroom and a locked office door, and the particular feeling of being right and powerless at the same time. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is being taken from slowly," she said. "A little at a time, in amounts small enough to dismiss. And I know what it costs by the time you realize what's been happening." She picked up her fork. "And because this time I have the documentation, and I intend to use it." Elias looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his fork too. They were almost finished eating when the door of the restaurant opened, and 2 men came in. Clara registered them the way she registered most things, peripherally, efficiently, filing away details before she was fully aware she was looking. Big men, well dressed for the county. One of them had a Southwestern Territorial Holdings pocket square. She had seen that pattern on a letterhead the night before, and the recognition was automatic, the way certain numbers were automatic. She kept her eyes on her plate. "Don't look up," she said, very quietly, in a voice that barely moved. Elias's hand paused over his plate. "Who is it?" "I don't know them by name, but the shorter one, gray vest, gold watch chain. He has correspondence paper from Southwestern Territorial in his breast pocket. I can see the letterhead from here." Elias was very still. "Holt's men." "Possibly. Or Price's. Either way," she took a slow, unhurried sip of coffee. "Either way, We finish our meal like two people who drove to town for supplies and stopped for breakfast. And then we get in the wagon and we drive home. And we do not let anyone in that room see us hurry. She felt his eyes on her. You're very good at this. I spent 3 years in a law office learning that most people see exactly what they expect to see, she said. If we look like we belong here, we belong here. They finished their coffee. Elias paid. They walked out into the street at the pace of two people with nowhere particular to be, climbed into the wagon, and pulled away from the hitching post without looking back. They were a mile out of town when Elias exhaled. They saw us, he said. The shorter one looked up when we stood. She kept her eyes on the road. He won't know what he saw yet, but by tonight, someone will have mentioned to someone that Elias Calhoun was in the county records office with a woman nobody recognized. She paused. Which means we have less time than I thought. How much less? Days, maybe fewer. She looked at him. Is there anyone in this county, someone with standing, someone Holt hasn't bought, who you trust enough to take this to? Elias drove in silence for a long moment. The horses moved steadily north, toward a ranch that was being emptied from the inside, toward a foreman who may have been complicit, toward a man named Reginald Holt, who had been building something patient and elaborate and cruel for 2 years, and who did not yet know that a woman with ink on her fingers and 9 pages of documentation in her traveling bag was about to take it apart. There's a judge, Elias said finally. Federal Circuit. Comes through every 6 weeks. He looked at the road. He's due in 8 days. 8 days, Clara said. Is that enough time? She thought about the documents in her bag, about the 11 ranches, the altered assessments, the forged county seal, the name Daniel Price written 11 times in the same careful hand, about Marcus Dean and the Shelby family, and 3 other ranches that had sold below value to the same buyer. It will have to be, she said. The ranch came into view on the rise, the weathered boards, the motionless windmill, the barn, the porch with its 6 empty holes where roses had once grown. Tom Aldous was at the fence line on the south pasture, working with his back to them. He did not turn as they drove into the yard. Clara looked at him for a moment, at the set of his shoulders, at the way he kept his back turned even as the sound of the wagon reached him, and something settled in her chest. A cold, clear certainty of the kind she had learned to trust. He knew they had gone to Harlan. He just didn't know yet what they had found. Tom Aldous did not turn around until Elias called his name. Then he turned slowly, the way a man turned when he had already decided what his face was going to look like before he showed it. His expression was easy, open, the expression of a man with nothing to hide. And Clara had spent 9 years in a law office learning that nothing to hide looked exactly like this when it was performed. Back early, Tom said. He was a broad man, mid-40s, with sun-creased skin and steady hands. The hands of someone who worked hard and knew it. Get everything you needed? Most of it. Elias climbed down from the wagon. His voice was level, carefully level. Come inside when you finish that post. I need to talk to you about the accounts. Something moved behind Tom's eyes. Fast, small, almost nothing. The accounts. The water assessment charges. I've got some questions about the documentation. Elias said it the way he said everything. Flat, direct, without inflection. Shouldn't take long. Tom nodded once. Give me 20 minutes. Elias went inside. Clara followed. And as she passed Tom, she did not look at him, and he did not look at her. And the quality of that mutual non-looking told her everything she needed to know about whether he suspected why they had really gone to Harlan. Inside the kitchen, Elias filled the coffee pot without speaking. Clara set her traveling bag on the table, opened it, removed the 9 pages of notes, and laid them in order on the surface. Her hands were steady. She had done this before. Sat in a room and waited for the conversation that was going to change the shape of things. The waiting was always the hardest part. The conversation itself was just arithmetic. "You don't have to be in the room," Elias said. He was at the stove, his back to her. "I know. It might be easier if you weren't. For him." "It might be easier for him," she said. "But it would be easier for you to have someone else present who heard exactly what was said." She paused. "And I have the documentation." He turned from the stove, looked at her for a moment. Then he set 2 cups on the table and sat down. They waited. Tom came in 17 minutes later. He hung his hat on the peg by the door. Old habit. The gesture of a man who had been coming into this kitchen for 6 years. And pulled out a chair and sat across from Elias with the comfortable ease of someone who belonged there. Then he looked at the 9 pages of notes on the table. Then at Clara. Then back at Elias. "What's this?" he said. "Southwestern Territorial Holdings," Elias said. "Tom, what do you know about them?" "Water Assessment Company, county contracted." Tom's voice was steady. "They've been filing the quarterly assessments for 2 years. It's all legitimate." "Is it?" Elias pushed the fraudulent document across the table. "This is the document in my files. The one you told me was county issued." Tom looked at it. "That's what they sent." "And this?" Elias pushed the county record copy Clara had requested the clerk to certify before they left. "This is what's actually on file in Harlan. The official county assessment for this ranch." He set his finger on the number. $48 annually, Tom, not $312 quarterly. The silence in the kitchen was the particular kind that came after a door had been opened that couldn't be closed again. Tom looked at both documents. His face did not change dramatically. It changed the way things changed when someone had already prepared for a conversation and was now simply executing the preparation. "There must be an error somewhere. I can ride into Harlan and—" "We just came from Harlan." Clara kept her voice even. "The records office. I pulled every Southwestern Territorial Holdings filing in Presidio County. There are 11 ranches on the account. All 11 have been charged between 1% and 400% above the actual county assessment." She turned one of her pages to face him. 3 of those ranches have sold in the last 18 months. All 3 sold to Reginald Holt at significantly below market value. Tom looked at the page. Something shifted in his face now. A small collapse, like a wall developing a crack it was trying not to show. "Tom," Elias's voice was quiet, not angry. Something worse than angry, and Clara recognized it. The voice of a man who was asking a question he already knew the answer to, and was giving one last moment for the answer to be different. "Did you know?" The kitchen was very still. "Elias, did you know what those charges were?" The crack in Tom's face widened. He looked at the table. His hands, those steady, calloused hands, were pressed flat against the surface now. And they were not quite steady anymore. "He came to me 3 years ago," Tom said. His voice had changed. The preparation had dropped out of it, and what was left was just a tired man talking. "After Rebecca died, after you weren't in good shape, Elias. You weren't looking at anything. The ranch was going sideways, and you couldn't see it, and I was trying to hold it together. What did he offer you?" $100. Tom set it to the table. "For every ranch account I could get him access to. Just access. Just the names of the families who were struggling, who were behind on their notes. who might be looking at a hard winter. He paused. I told myself it was information. Just information. He was going to make offers anyway. He always does. And if I gave him the names, at least the families would have a buyer. At least they wouldn't lose everything. He didn't offer them fair prices, Tom. I know that. The words came out rough. I know it now. And the documents. Clara kept her voice level, clinical, the way she kept her voice when the thing in front of her was complicated, and she needed clarity more than she needed feeling. The fraudulent assessments. Did you file those into Elias's records? Tom's jaw tightened. Price sent them. I put them in the filing cabinet with the rest of the paperwork. He looked up at Elias for the first time since the conversation had started, and his face was the face of a man who had been carrying something for a long time, and had finally set it down, and found that it had been heavier than he'd let himself believe. I told myself it was temporary, that when things got better, I'd tell you. I'd explain. I'd make it right. 3 years, Elias said. Just those 2 words. I know. Rebecca's funeral. You sat with me through the whole winter. You were the one who stayed. I know. Tom's voice broke on the second word. Just slightly. Just enough. I know what I did. Both things. I know they don't cancel each other out. Elias stood up. He moved to the window, stood with his back to the room, and Clara watched the set of his shoulders and understood that he needed a moment and that the moment was not for her. She looked at Tom. How much does Holt know about why we went to Harlan today? Tom looked at her. His eyes were reddened but steady. Whatever else he was not a man who fell apart easily. By tonight, everything. He's got someone at the county office. The clerk. No, Tom shook his head. Not the clerk. The clerk's an honest kid. It's the deputy registrar. Woman named Ellen Foss. She's been on Holt's payroll for 4 years. Clara wrote the name down. And Price. Will he move the filings before the federal circuit judge arrives? Tom went very still. How do you know about the judge? Because I looked at the circuit schedule in the records office while I was there. She kept her pen moving. Judge Harlan Mears. Due in 8 days. If Price knows we have copies of those filings, he will attempt to alter or remove the originals before Mears arrives. She looked at Tom directly. Unless someone gets to those records first. Clara. Elias had turned from the window. His voice was careful. I know what I'm asking. She looked at him. I need a certified copy of every Southwestern Territorial Holdings filing in that office, signed by the clerk, before Price can pull them. And I need it today. She turned back to Tom. You're going to ride into Harlan and get it. Because you have standing that I don't. And because the clerk trusts a face he's seen before. And because... She paused. Because it is the one specific thing you can do right now that begins to make this right. Tom looked at Elias. Elias looked at Tom for a long moment. The look between them had the compressed weight of 6 years in it. 6 years of early mornings and hard winters, and a funeral, and a season of grief that Tom had genuinely helped him survive. And underneath all of it now, 3 years of a slow, deliberate betrayal that had cost Elias nearly $4,000 and 3 neighboring families their land. Go, Elias said. Tom stood. He took his hat off the peg. At the door, he stopped. Elias, I am sorry. I know that doesn't... Go get the records, Elias said. We'll talk when you get back. Tom went. The sound of his horse leaving the yard faded into the dry afternoon heat. And then the kitchen was quiet, except for the tick of the stove cooling and the distant low of cattle at the water trough. He'll do it, Elias said. He was still at the window. I think so too. Clara gathered her notes back into order. But we need to move tonight regardless. I want to ride to Marcus Dean's place before dark. Elias turned. Why Dean? Because he's one of the 11 ranches on the fraudulent account, and he hasn't sold yet. Which means he's either more solvent than the others, or more stubborn. And either way, he's a potential witness. She put the notes in her bag. If he'll sign an affidavit confirming he received similar documents and paid similar charges, that's corroboration. A judge looks at one fraudulent account and sees a dispute. He looks at 2 or 3 signed affidavits and sees a conspiracy. Elias was quiet for a moment. You said you intended to have the truth and the standing and the witnesses this time. Yes. How many witnesses do you need? As many as I can get in 8 days. She snapped the bag closed. Mr. Dean first, then the Shelby family, if they're reachable. Then whoever else on that list is still in the county. She stood. And I need you to write down every conversation you can remember having with Tom Aldous about those assessments. Every detail. Dates if you have them. Approximate dates if you don't. That's a record of verbal misrepresentation, which supports the documentary fraud. He looked at her. That steady, measuring look she had come to understand was not skepticism, but attention. The way he looked at things he was taking seriously. Clara. He said her name the way he'd started saying it, without the miss in front, without the careful distance of it. Just the name. What are you doing here? She blinked. I'm building a case. That's not what I mean. He moved away from the window, came to the table and stood on the other side of it, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face and the thing underneath the exhaustion that was not exhaustion. You came off a train platform yesterday morning with nothing. A foreman's wages and a roof over your head. You didn't have to do any of this. Someone is stealing your ranch, she said. Someone has been stealing from a lot of people for a long time, without anyone doing what you're doing. He paused. Why? The question sat between them in the afternoon light filtering through the kitchen window. Clara looked at her hands on the traveling bag, the ink stain on her right index finger, the calluses that had started forming in the 2 days since she'd arrived, the evidence of the person she had been and the person she was becoming in this place. Because I know how it ends if nobody does anything, she said. I know exactly how it ends, because I lived the version where the evidence existed and nobody acted on it. She looked up at him. I watched a law firm continue operating for 3 years after I found the proof. I watched the people they harmed get nothing. I told myself that wasn't my fault, that I had done what I could. She paused. I stopped believing that somewhere around year 2. He didn't say anything. He was just listening, in the complete way that he listened, with his whole attention, without preparing what he was going to say next. I'm not doing this for absolution, she said. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I can, and because the fact that I can means I should. She picked up the bag. And because someone should have done it 3 years ago, and it's a waste to keep counting the years when there's still time to do it now. Something changed in his face. It was not a dramatic change, not the kind of change that announced itself. Just a small, deep shift. The kind that happened when a wall that had been carefully maintained for a long time developed a crack it had not been asked permission to develop. My wife used to say something like that, he said quietly. She used to say that the trouble with most people was not that they didn't know the right thing, but that they kept waiting until it was convenient. He paused. She said convenience was just cowardice wearing a clean shirt. Clara was quiet for a moment. She sounds like she was right about most things. She was right about everything. His voice carried a note she had not heard in it before. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but something adjacent to it. The sound of someone referring to a loss that had become so much a part of them, they no longer tried to speak around it. She would have liked you, he said. She would have liked you a great deal. The kitchen held the afternoon quiet between them, and Clara did not know what to say to that. It was too precise an offering to deflect, and too significant to simply accept as courtesy. So she said nothing, and he said nothing, and after a moment they moved together without discussion toward what needed to happen next. They rode to Marcus Dean's place as the sun was making its slow descent toward the western hills. Dean was a weathered man in his 60s, with suspicious eyes and a shotgun in his left hand when he opened the door, and Clara recognized the particular wariness of a person who had been burned before and had reorganized his entire life around not being burned again. "I know about the Southwestern Territorial charges, Mr. Dean," she said from the yard, hands visible, voice clear. "I know you've been paying them. I know they're fraudulent. And I know who's behind them." Dean looked at her, looked at Elias, looked back at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who worked in a law office for 9 years and knows what a forged county seal looks like." She reached into her bag and drew out the certified copy of the county assessment record, held it up. "The real county assessment for your ranch. What you should have been paying, not what you were charged." She paused. "I'd like you to look at it, Mr. Dean, and then I'd like you to tell me what you think." He looked at it for a long time, standing in his doorway with the shotgun in his left hand and the document in his right, the western light falling across the numbers, across the seal, across the truth of what he had been paying for 2 years. Then he lowered the shotgun. "Come inside," he said. They were in Dean's kitchen for an hour. When they came out, Clara had a signed affidavit in her bag, and Marcus Dean had the expression of a man who had gone from carrying his anger alone to being in the company of people who intended to do something with it. "I'll talk to the Shelby boy," Dean said at the door. "He's in Harlan, working at the mill now. Lost his family's place last spring. He'll have plenty to say." "Tell him we need it in writing," Clara said. "Signed and dated." "He'll do it." Dean looked at Elias. "Your daddy built this county, Elias. He dug the first well, ran the first fence. Some of us remember that." He looked at Clara. "You got 8 days until Mears comes through?" "7 now." He nodded once. "Then don't waste the rest of tonight." They rode back in the thickening dusk, the horses moving steadily north, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky above them. Clara had the affidavit in her bag, and Marcus Dean's word about the Shelby boy, and the beginning of something that had the shape, if she built it carefully, of something a federal judge would have to take seriously. She was thinking through the order of the remaining steps. What needed to happen in what sequence? Which witness needed to be approached before which document was submitted? How to get the certified filings secured before Price moved them? When Elias said, "There's a light at the ranch." She looked ahead, a yellow light in the window that was not the lamp they had left burning low. Brighter. Moving. Not a lamp. A torch. Elias spurred his horse, and she followed, and they came into the yard at a canter to find Tom Aldous' horse standing lathered at the rail, and Tom himself on the porch with a rifle and 3 men on horseback in the yard, who were not from this ranch and had not been invited. The middle rider was a broad man on a gray horse, well-dressed, with a gold watch chain catching the torchlight. He looked at Elias coming in from the road, and then at Clara, and something moved across his face. An assessment, swift and cold. The look of a man recalculating. "Mr. Calhoun," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who had spent a long time making unpleasant things sound reasonable. "I heard you'd been to Harlan today. Thought I'd ride over and clear up any confusion before it became a problem." Elias brought his horse to a stop 10 feet from the man and looked at him with an expression Clara had not seen on his face before. Not anger, not fear, just a complete, settled stillness. The stillness of a man who had decided something and was now simply waiting for the appropriate moment to act on it. "Mr. Holt," he said, "get off my land." Reginald Holt did not get off the land. He smiled instead, the patient, unhurried smile of a man who had been told no many times, and had learned that no was simply the opening position of a negotiation he had not yet begun. He shifted in his saddle with the ease of someone who felt entirely comfortable exactly where he was, on a horse he owned, in a county he was steadily purchasing, looking down at a man he had been methodically ruining for 2 years. "I'm not here for trouble, Elias." He used the given name deliberately. The way you used a given name to remind someone that you had known them long enough to feel entitled to it. "I'm here because I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd rather clear it up between neighbors than let it become something neither of us wants." "There's no misunderstanding." Elias had not moved. His horse stood steady beneath him, and he sat it the way he sat everything. Straight, still, with a quality of patience that was not passivity, but something more dangerous. "I know what Southwestern Territorial Holdings is. I know what Daniel Price did. And I know how much money has left this ranch through documents that your brother-in-law fabricated." He paused. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud." Holt's smile did not waver. "Those are serious words. They're accurate words. They're the words of a man who's been fed a particular interpretation of some paperwork by someone who—" Holt's eyes moved to Clara, standing beside her horse at the edge of the yard. The look was brief, appraising, dismissive in the specific way that men like Holt were dismissive of women like Clara. Not with contempt exactly, but with a casual erasure, as though she were a detail in the background rather than a person in the foreground. "Someone who arrived on your property 2 days ago, with no references and no standing in this county, and who has apparently convinced you to make accusations that could damage a great many reputations." "She has a name," Elias said. "I'm sure she does. Use it or don't speak about her." The smile thinned, just slightly. "Mr. Calhoun, the documents she found are real," Elias said. "The county records she pulled are certified. The affidavit from Marcus Dean is signed." He watched Holt's face on the word affidavit, watched the smile make a small, involuntary adjustment. "And Judge Mears arrives in 6 days, so whatever you came here to say tonight, I'd think carefully about whether it's the kind of thing you want said before a federal circuit judge." Holt was quiet for a moment. The torch in his rider's hand threw shifting light across his face, and in that light, Clara could see the calculation moving behind his eyes. Not panic, not yet, but the rapid, practiced arithmetic of a man reassessing a situation that had moved faster than he'd expected. "I'll give you 5,000, Holt said. The number landed in the yard like something dropped from a height. $5,000, cash, by the end of the week. For the ranch, the cattle, all the land holdings. He opened his hands in the gesture of a man being generous. "That's more than fair, Elias. That's more than this land is worth in any market in this county right now, and you know it." "You're raising your offer," Clara said. Holt looked at her. She had not moved from her position beside her horse, and she kept her voice the way she kept it when she was in a room with people who were lying. Level, precise, without affect. "You offered Elias $3,000 last spring," she said, "through an intermediary. Now you're here in person offering $5,000. That's a 66% increase in 6 months." She looked at him steadily. Men don't raise offers by 66% because they've become more generous. They raise them because they've become more afraid. She paused. "What exactly are you afraid we've found, Mr. Holt?" The calculation behind Holt's eyes went cold. The warmth, the performed neighborliness that was his most reliable tool, dropped out of his expression entirely. And what replaced it was the thing that had always been underneath it. Hard, patient, certain of itself. The face of a man who had been getting what he wanted for 15 years, and had built a comprehensive theory of his own impunity on that foundation. "I'd be careful," he said. His voice had changed too. "A woman with no family and no legal standing, making accusations against a man with considerable resources in this county. That's a precarious position. I'd think about that precariousness before I made any more statements I couldn't support." "I can support every statement I've made with documentation," Clara said. "Certified copies from the county records office, a signed affidavit, and 9 pages of annotated ledger analysis that tracks the fraudulent charges across 24 months. She held his gaze. "Would you like me to tell you what page the Southwestern Territorial Holdings account appears on? Or would you prefer to simply acknowledge that you know exactly what's in those records because your brother-in-law created them?" Holt stared at her. Tom Aldous, from the porch, said nothing. He had not moved since Elias and Clara rode in, standing with the rifle held level, his face carrying the expression of a man who had made a decision about himself tonight and was holding to it. "We're done here," Elias said. "You've had your answer. Ride out." "You're making a mistake." Holt had recovered his composure, but it was thinner now, stretched over something that was not composure at all. "You think a woman with a stack of papers and a borrowed horse can walk into a federal court and dismantle 15 years of—" He stopped himself. 15 years, Clara said quietly. "That's useful. Thank you." Holt's jaw locked. "Get off my land," Elias said. The same words as before, the same quiet certainty, but with something added now. Not anger, not triumph. Just the absolute, settled finality of a man who had made his decision and was not revisiting it. "Tonight, and don't come back." Holt looked at Elias for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. Then he gathered his reins, and without another word, he turned his horse and rode out of the yard, his 2 men falling in behind him, the torchlight receding into the darkness until there was nothing left of it but the smell of smoke and the sound of hooves on hard earth, growing distant and then gone. The yard was quiet. Tom came down off the porch. He looked at Elias, then at Clara, then at the certified documents rolled under his arm. He had ridden to Harlan and back in the time they had been at Marcus Dean's, and the ride showed on him, the lather on his horse showing on him, too. "I got them," Tom said. He held out the documents. "Clerk signed every page. 13 filings, all certified. I told him what they were, and he didn't hesitate." He paused. "He said to tell you he's sorry he didn't notice sooner." Clara took the documents. She unrolled the first page in the torchlight, checked the clerk's signature and the date stamp, rolled it back. "Did anyone see you pull them?" Ellen Foss was at the back of the office. I don't know if she was watching. Assume she was. Clara handed the roll to Elias and pulled out her notes. "Which means Price knows by now that we have certified copies." She thought for a moment. "He can't alter what we already have. But he may try to file counter-documentation before Mears arrives. A backdated correction, a clerical amendment, something that muddies the record enough to create doubt." She looked at Elias. "We need a lawyer. Tonight if possible. Tomorrow at the latest." "Closest lawyer I trust is Robert Finch in Harlan," Elias said. "He's old, but he's honest. He handled my father's land deed." "Can you get him here tomorrow morning?" "I can try." "Try tonight." She turned to Tom. "The Shelby boy. Marcus Dean said he's in Harlan. Do you know him?" "Pete Shelby. I know him." Tom looked at the ground. "I watched his family lose that place. I knew why they were losing it, and I didn't—" He stopped. "Yes, I know him. Go find him tonight. Don't send a message. Go yourself, in person, and tell him exactly what's happening, and that we need his affidavit by tomorrow afternoon. She looked at Tom directly. "Tell him the truth, all of it, including your part. Because if he finds out later that you had a role in what happened to his family's land, it will poison everything he's given us." Tom held her gaze. His face was the face of a man accepting a consequence he had earned. "All right. And Tom," she paused, "what you did tonight, writing to Harlan, getting those certifications, that matters. It doesn't undo the rest of it, but it matters." He nodded once, put his hat on, and went to his horse. Elias watched him go. Then he looked at Clara. "Finch won't come out tonight. Send a rider with a letter. Tonight's date on it, your signature. Specific enough that he understands it's urgent, but not so specific that if the letter is intercepted, it tells Holt anything he doesn't already know." She went up the porch steps. "I'll write it." They worked at the kitchen table until past midnight. Clara drafted the letter to Finch in precise, careful language. Factual, unemotional. The language of documentation rather than argument. Elias read it, made 2 small adjustments, and sent his hired hand Caleb out with it before 11. Then they went through the certified documents together, page by page, building the architecture of the case with the same focused, quiet intensity they had brought to the ledgers 2 nights before. At some point, Clara became aware that Elias had made coffee without being asked, and set a cup beside her hand without interrupting what she was reading. And she drank it without looking up. And neither of them commented on the small, ordinary domesticity of the gesture, or what it meant that it had happened without either of them thinking about it. "The Shelby land," Clara said, around 11:30. She had the sale document from the county file in front of her. A certified copy she had requested along with the assessment records. "Sold to Holt for $4,200. March of this year." She ran her finger down the attached assessment history. "The fraudulent charges on the Shelby account go back 28 months. At $312 quarterly, that's approximately $3,500 extracted before the sale." She looked up. "They didn't sell because they were failing, Elias. They sold because they had been made to fail. Deliberately." Over 28 months. Elias was very still. "And the $4,200 Holt paid them," she set the document down. "That was essentially a refund of their own money. He bled them dry, and then bought what was left with what he'd taken." She kept her voice level. She had learned to keep her voice level with numbers this ugly. "If Judge Mears sees this sequence, the assessment charges, the timing, the sale price, it is not just fraud. It is a structured scheme to dispossess families of their land." She looked at Elias. "That is a federal matter. That is the kind of thing that ends with criminal indictment, not just civil recovery." Elias looked at the document for a long moment. "Pete Shelby is 22 years old," he said. "He was born on that land. His grandfather broke the first ground on it." He paused. "His father died 2 months after they sold. People said it was his heart." Clara said nothing. She set the document carefully on the pile with the others and wrote a note in the margin of her own record. She did not say what she was thinking, because what she was thinking was that she had come to a railway platform in Texas with nothing, and had somehow walked into the middle of something that was much larger and much uglier than one fraudulent water assessment, and that the shape of it was becoming clearer with every document she turned over, and that the clarity was both necessary and terrible. "Get some sleep," Elias said. He was watching her. "We need to be sharp tomorrow when Finch comes." "In a few minutes." "Clara." She looked up. "You said in Philadelphia they believed the lawyer over you because you had no standing." He held her gaze. "You have standing now. You have certified documents, a signed affidavit, a county clerk who saw what he saw, a foreman who will testify, and a witness whose family lost their land to the same scheme." He paused. You built that in 48 hours. She looked at the stack of documents on the table, the 9 pages of notes, the certified county records, Marcus Dean's affidavit, the fraudulent assessment with its wrong seal, the ledger analysis laid out in her precise, small hand. 2 days of work. 2 days of being the woman who had been left on a platform and had sat there for 4 hours rather than let anyone see her falter. "It's not enough yet," she said. "No, but it's the foundation." He stood, picked up his hat. "And foundations are what hold everything up." He went to the door, then stopped. "Those holes in the porch railing," he said. He was facing away from her, the way he sometimes said the things that cost him most. "I'm going to put something back there, in the spring, when the ground is ready. Something that grows." A pause. "I haven't decided what yet." He went out. The screen door closed with its familiar slap. Clara sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table, and the document spread around her, and the lamp burning low. Then she pulled the ledger toward her and opened it to page 31, where the analysis was still incomplete, and she picked up her pen. Robert Finch arrived at 7 the next morning, with his reading glasses and his case, and the brisk, slightly irritable manner of a man who had been pulled from his routine and was reserving judgment about whether it was worth it. He was 70 years old, lean as a fence rail, with white hair and eyes that had the sharp, undimmed quality of someone whose mind had not softened with age, but had simply shed everything that wasn't useful. He sat down at the kitchen table. Clara put the certified documents in front of him, in the order she had arranged the night before. Finch read without speaking for 20 minutes. Then he took his glasses off, cleaned them, put them back on, and read the last 3 pages again. Then he set the glasses on the table. "Young woman," he said, "where did you learn to build a case?" 9 years in a Philadelphia law office." "Doing what?" "Accounts and documentation, watching the lawyers work." He looked at her over the top of his glasses. "This is not accounts and documentation. This is an evidentiary structure." He tapped the annotated ledger analysis. "This sequencing, fraudulent charge initiation, payment extraction, forced sale, acquisition, this is the argument. This tells the story in the language a judge reads." He paused. "Did you do this yourself?" "Yes." "Last night?" "The framework was built last night. The documentation collection started 2 days ago." Finch looked at Elias. "Where did you find her?" "Train platform," Elias said. Finch looked back at Clara for a moment with an expression she could not quite read. Then he picked up his pen. "All right. Here is what we have, and here is what we still need." He spoke for the next 30 minutes in the precise, structured way of a man who had been ordering legal arguments for 50 years. Clara listened and took notes, and asked 3 questions, each of which made Finch look at her with that same unreadable expression. What they had was substantial. What they still needed was Pete Shelby's affidavit, and, if possible, a statement from one of the other ranches on Holt's acquisition list, a family who had sold and could speak to the circumstances. And they needed it before Mears arrived, which was now 5 days away. Tom came back at noon with Pete Shelby. Pete was 22 years old, thin, with a particular quality of grief that settled in young men who had lost something foundational. Not broken, not bitter, but set, like bone that had healed crooked from a break that hadn't been properly treated. He sat down at the table and looked at the documents Clara laid in front of him, and his face moved through several things before it arrived at a controlled, quiet fury. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "My father knew. We just didn't have the paperwork to prove it." He looked at Clara. "You have the paperwork." "I have enough to start," she said. I need your signature on an affidavit describing the assessment charges you received, the dates, the amounts, and the circumstances of the sale. In your own words, exactly what happened. And then what? And then we take all of it to Judge Mears in 5 days, and we ask him to freeze Holt's land acquisitions pending a federal fraud investigation and to order restitution. She held his gaze. I cannot promise what he'll decide. I can tell you that the case is solid and getting stronger, and that you will not be standing in front of him alone. Pete Shelby looked at the documents, looked at Tom Aldous, who was sitting at the far end of the table with the expression of a man paying a debt. Looked back at Clara. "Give me the paper," he said. He signed the affidavit at 12:40. Finch witnessed it and filed his own notarization beside Pete's signature. Then Finch stacked the entire case file, squared the edges, and set it in front of Clara with both hands flat on top of it. "I have practiced law in this county for 48 years, he said. "I have seen land fraud, water fraud, deed manipulation, and every other variety of theft that one man can visit upon another." He looked at her steadily. "This is the cleanest case file I have seen walk through any door in 20 years. He paused. "Mears is going to have questions. I'll answer them. He's going to challenge the chain of custody on the certified records. The clerk's signature is dated and time-stamped before any potential tampering could have occurred. I can account for every document from the moment it left that office." Finch looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression settled into a decision. "I'll present alongside you," he said, "for standing purposes. Mears won't give me trouble. He's known me 20 years. He picked up his hat. "But you'll be doing the talking, Miss Whitfield. That case is yours, and it should be heard in the voice that built it." After Finch left, the kitchen held a particular quiet. The quiet of a room where something has shifted, where the work is not finished, but the shape of the ending has become visible for the first time. Pete Shelby sat at the table with his hands around a coffee cup, not drinking, just holding the warmth of it. Tom stood near the door with the look of a man who was not sure whether he was welcome to stay. Clara set the case file on the shelf beside the window, squared the edges, and stood looking at it for a moment. All of it. 9 pages of notes, and 13 certified documents, and 2 signed affidavits, and the annotated ledger analysis, and the fraudulent assessment with its wrong seal. 2 days and 2 nights. Elias came to stand beside her. Not close enough to touch, just close enough that she was aware of him, the way she had been aware of him for 2 days. As a specific, steady presence, the kind you began to orient yourself by, without quite deciding to. 5 days, he said. 5 days. What do we do until then? She thought about it. About the holes in the porch railing. About roses that had been dug up because the grief of looking at them was too much to carry. About a woman who had counted to 11 on a railway platform and told herself she would not cry, and had not cried, and had instead done something considerably more useful. "We wait," she said, "and we make sure Holt doesn't do anything in those 5 days that can't be undone." She looked at the case file, and I want to review the ledger for the years before Tom handled the books. There may be earlier irregularities I haven't found yet. You think it goes back further than 2 years? I think Holt is a patient man who has been doing this for 15 years, and I think patience like that doesn't start with the big moves. She turned to look at him. I think it starts small. I think it starts with learning exactly how much a man can lose before he notices. And I think someone has been watching this ranch for a long time. Elias looked at the case file. Then he looked at Clara. And the thing that had been building in his face over 2 days, quietly, carefully, the way things built in a man who had spent 4 years keeping everything behind a wall, was present now, without the wall in front of it. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. He opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever he had been going to say, he pulled it back, set it aside, looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up. "I'm glad you were on that platform," he said. "I'm glad I went over." She held his gaze. The afternoon light was steady and clear through the kitchen window, and the case file sat on the shelf, and the ranch was quiet around them. And somewhere on the south fence line, the cattle were moving toward the water trough, thin and patient and still alive. "So am I," Clara Whitfield said. The 5 days did not pass quietly. On the second day, Daniel Price filed an amended assessment record with the county office, a backdated correction that attempted to reframe the Southwestern Territorial Holdings charges as a legitimate rate adjustment authorized under a provision of the 1886 Water Code. Finch sent word by rider that afternoon. Clara read the amendment twice, set it down, and told Elias it was the best thing that could have happened. "He's scared," she said. "Scared men make mistakes." This amendment contradicts the original filing in 3 specific places, and the date on the authorization signature is a Sunday. County offices are closed on Sundays. He forged a Sunday signature on a document that was supposedly processed on a business day. She looked at Finch's note. "He's trying to repair the record, and he's doing it too fast to do it carefully. Can we use that? I'm already writing the response." She pulled the ledger paper toward her. "An amendment filed under duress, with internal contradictions, after the original records have already been certified and copied. That doesn't repair the fraud. It compounds it. It shows consciousness of guilt." She picked up her pen. "Mears is going to find this very interesting." On the 3rd day, Holt's man Chester Briggs rode slowly past the ranch twice without stopping. The second time, he paused at the gate long enough to be visible from the porch before riding on. Clara watched from the window and said nothing. Elias stood on the porch with his rifle across his arm and said nothing either. Caleb, the hired hand, slept in the barn with a shotgun for the next 2 nights, which was his own decision, and he had not been asked. On the 4th day, Marcus Dean rode over with a second affidavit, not his own, but from a woman named Frances Alderman, widow, whose husband had sold their land to Holt the previous winter and died 3 months later. Frances Alderman was 67 years old, had been afraid for a year, and had apparently been waiting for someone to show her that being afraid did not mean being silent. She had written the affidavit herself, in a careful schoolroom hand, and signed it in ink so dark it looked like it had been pressed into the page by sheer force of determination. Clara added it to the case file and sat for a moment with her hand on top of it. "That's 4, Elias said from the doorway. 4 signed accounts, 13 certified documents, Finch's legal analysis, the amended filing from Price with my annotated contradiction notes." She looked at the shelf where the file sat, and the original fraudulent assessment with the wrong seal, which is the simplest piece of evidence in the whole case, the kind anyone in that courtroom can look at and understand immediately, without legal training, without explanation. She paused. "We're ready." On the 5th morning, Judge Harlan Mears rode into Harlan on the federal circuit, as he had done every 6 weeks for 11 years, and set up his traveling court in the back room of the county courthouse, as he always did, with his clerk and his record books, and the particular air of a man who had heard a great many things and was prepared to hear a great many more. Robert Finch had sent word ahead. Mears had agreed to hear the matter before his regular docket. They were scheduled for 8 in the morning. Clara was dressed and at the kitchen table with the case file at 5:30. Elias came down the hall at 5:45, fully dressed, and found her there with coffee already made and 3 pages of her argument notes laid out in order, going over them for the last time with the concentrated stillness of someone who had already done everything that could be done and was now simply making sure nothing had been forgotten. He sat down across from her, poured himself coffee, did not interrupt. At 6:15, she looked up. "I've been thinking about what Holt is going to argue," she said. "Tell me." "He's going to say that Southwestern Territorial Holdings is a legitimate company operating under a valid county contract, and that any discrepancies in the individual ranch assessments were clerical errors, not fraud. He'll produce paperwork. He's had 5 days to produce paperwork." She folded her hands on the table. "He has money, and he has a lawyer who's probably better than Finch in terms of courtroom experience. And he has 15 years of established relationships in this county." She paused. "What he doesn't have is a coherent explanation for why Daniel Price filed an amendment on a Sunday. And he doesn't have an explanation for Francis Alderman's husband dying 3 months after a forced sale. And he doesn't have an explanation for why 11 separate ranch accounts were all established in the same 4-month window, at rates that bear no relationship to the actual county assessment." Elias looked at her. "You're not nervous?" "I'm terrified," she said simply. "I have been terrified since the morning I walked into a Philadelphia courtroom at 26 and watched a man with more standing than me dismantle 9 years of careful work in 20 minutes. She looked at the case file. "The difference is that this time I am not walking in with truth alone. I am walking in with truth that has been built into a structure that cannot be pulled apart without leaving marks." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Whatever happens in there today, whatever Mears decides, you did something that mattered. Even if he rules against us, you found it, you named it, you made it visible." He paused. "That can't be taken back." She looked at him, at the lines around his eyes and the steady set of his jaw, and the 4 years of carried weight that sat in the way he held himself. And underneath all of that, something that had not been there a week ago, or perhaps had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions, the way seeds waited in dry ground for rain. "I know," she said, "but I intend to win." The courthouse back room smelled of old paper and lamp oil, and the particular dust of a room used for serious purposes. Judge Mears was a compact man of 65, with a gray beard trimmed to military precision, and eyes that assessed everything that came before them with the dispassion of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what human beings did to one another over land and money. Holt was already there when they arrived, seated on one side of the long table with a lawyer from San Antonio named Cavendish, young, polished, expensive, and 2 ranch hands stationed near the door in the manner of men present to remind everyone of the weight behind their employer's position. Price sat at the far end of the table with the sunken expression of a man who had made a series of decisions that had seemed manageable at the time. Finch set the case file on the table and did not look at Holt. Clara sat beside Finch with her notes in front of her, and her hands still in her lap, and her eyes on Judge Mears. Mears looked at the room, looked at both tables, looked at Clara with the brief, assessing glance of a man who was noting that she was not a lawyer and was reserving judgment on what that meant. "Mr. Finch," he said, "I've read your preliminary filing. You have a substantial claim here. Let's hear it from the beginning." Finch nodded to Clara. She stood. She laid it out the way she had organized it, beginning with the ledger discrepancies, walking through the methodology of the fraud, establishing the connection between the fraudulent assessments and the subsequent land sales, presenting the certified county records against the documents found in Elias's files, walking through the 11 ranch accounts with the dates and amounts. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes, because she had read those documents often enough that the numbers lived in her the way certain things lived in a person, permanently, without effort. Mears did not interrupt. He made notes in a small, precise hand. Cavendish objected twice. Mears overruled both times without looking up. When she was finished, she set Francis Alderman's affidavit on top of the file and slid it across to Mears. "That is a signed statement from the widow of a man who sold his land to Mr. Holt in December of last year at 40% below its assessed value, following 28 months of fraudulent assessment charges. Her husband died in March." She kept her voice level. "I am not claiming causation. I am noting the sequence." Mears looked at the affidavit. Then he looked at Cavendish. "Counselor." Cavendish stood. He was good. Clara had expected him to be good, and she watched his argument the way she had once watched the senior partner in Philadelphia, looking for the place where the performance separated from the substance. He challenged the chain of custody on the certified records. He argued that the assessment discrepancies were the result of a rate structure that had been miscommunicated to individual ranches. He produced a company charter for Southwestern Territorial Holdings and a contract with the county signed by a commissioner who had since retired. He did not address the Sunday signature on Price's amended filing. "Counselor," Clara said, when Mears gave her the opportunity to respond, "the company charter Mr. Cavendish has produced is dated 14 months after the first Southwestern Territorial Holdings assessment charge appeared in Elias Calhoun's ledger." She set her annotated timeline on the table and turned it to face Mears. "The company was charging fees for water rights assessment before it legally existed. The charges in the earliest accounts precede the charter by over a year." She paused. "Additionally, the county contract Mr. Cavendish cited was signed by Commissioner Harold Briggs, who retired in February of this year." Commissioner Briggs is Reginald Holt's uncle. The room was quiet. Mears set his pen down. "Mr. Price." He looked at the far end of the table. "The amended filing you submitted to this office 4 days ago. The authorization signature is dated a Sunday." Price's face had the color of old ash. There may have been an administrative error. The county office has been closed on Sundays for 30 years. Mears's voice did not change in tone. It simply became more deliberate, the way a hand became more deliberate when it was picking up something that required care. "That is not an administrative error. That is a document with a false date." He looked at Cavendish. "I assume you were not aware of that when you included the original filing in your client's defense." Cavendish looked at the document in front of him. Something moved across his face, the expression of a man recalculating whether he was in the right room for the right reasons. "I was not, Your Honor. I assumed as much." Mears gathered his notes. He looked at the case file, at the certified documents, at the annotated timeline, at the 4 signed affidavits. He looked at Holt, who had been silent for the last 40 minutes, with the controlled stillness of a man watching the ground he had built over 15 years develop cracks he could not stop. "Mr. Holt," Mears said, "I have been riding this circuit for 11 years. In that time I have heard a great many disputes about land and water rights in this county. I have watched families lose things they built with their own hands, and I have, on occasion, lacked sufficient evidence to do what justice required." He paused. "I do not lack it today." He ruled for 2 hours. When he was finished, Southwestern Territorial Holdings was dissolved by federal order, pending a full criminal investigation. All land acquisitions connected to fraudulent assessment charges, 4 properties, including the Shelby family land, were frozen pending restitution hearings. Daniel Price was remanded to the county sheriff pending federal fraud charges. Elias Calhoun's fraudulent payments, totaling $3,744, were to be returned within 60 days from the assets of the dissolved company. And Reginald Holt, for the first time in 15 years, was told by a federal judge in a room full of witnesses that what he had been doing had a name, and that the name was fraud, and that the people he had done it to would be heard. Holt left the courthouse without speaking. Cavendish followed, with the expression of a man making a rapid professional reassessment. Price was walked out by the sheriff with his hands in front of him, his head down. Clara stood outside on the courthouse steps in the morning light and felt the particular sensation of a thing completed. Not triumphant, not relieved, just finished. The way a long piece of work felt finished, solid, permanent. The kind of thing that could not be undone. Finch came out beside her and shook her hand with both of his. 48 years, he said, and that is the cleanest piece of legal reasoning I have ever heard from someone without a law degree. Thank you, Mr. Finch. You should have a law degree, he said. I intend to write a letter to that effect. He put his hat on. Mears said the same thing, incidentally. He asked me afterward who you were. I told him you were the woman who figured it out. He looked at her over his glasses. He said he'd been watching the circuit for a decade, waiting for someone to bring him a case like this one. He paused. I believe he meant it as a compliment. He went down the steps. Marcus Dean was in the street with Pete Shelby, and when Finch reached the bottom step, Pete looked up at Clara and nodded. One nod, simple and complete. The acknowledgement of one person to another who has done something that mattered. She nodded back. Elias came to stand beside her. He had been behind her through the whole hearing, present and still, and she had been aware of him the way she had been aware of him since the first morning, as a steady, specific weight in the room, something she had begun to orient by. They stood on the steps for a moment without speaking, watching the street resume its ordinary business around the extraordinary thing that had just happened inside the building behind them. The Shelby land, Clara said. The restitution hearing. Pete should have representation. Someone who understands the chain of title well enough to argue for return of the property, not just damages. Finch will do it, Elias said. I'll pay his fee. The other families, too. All of them. He said it without hesitation. She looked at him. That's going to cost you. I know. He looked at the street. The 3,000 Mears ordered returned. That goes to the other families first. The ones who sold. They lost more than money. He paused. I still have the ranch. I still have the cattle, what's left of them. I'll manage. You'll need someone to rework the account books, she said. Once the restitution is processed, the ledgers are going to require a complete reconstruction. There are 2 years of corrupted records that need to be rebuilt from scratch. He turned to look at her. The morning light was full and direct, and she met it the way she met everything, straight on, without flinching, her gray eyes clear and steady. I was thinking, he said, that the person best suited to rebuild them is the person who spent 2 days taking them apart. That's logical. It's not only logic, he said, and there it was. The thing he had been carrying since the kitchen table on the first night. Since the moment he had brought the lamp in and set it beside her hand without interrupting what she was reading. Since the morning on the porch when he had told her about roses. It's that I would like you to stay, not as the housekeeper, not as the accounts clerk. He looked at her directly, the way he looked at everything he intended to take seriously. As whatever we become, if you're willing. Clara looked at him for a moment, at the lines in his face and the steadiness in his eyes, and the 4 years of loss he had carried without putting it down, and the 2 days of something new that had grown up alongside the loss without displacing it, the way living things sometimes grew. Alongside grief, not instead of it. She thought about 11 seconds on a railway platform, about a Philadelphia courtroom and a locked office door, and 9 years of careful work that had been taken from her, about sitting on a trunk in the August heat, telling herself she had options when she had none, and a man she did not know coming around the corner of a station building and picking up the other end of the weight she was carrying. She thought about the holes in the porch railing where roses had been, about a man who kept them empty not because he had forgotten what they meant, but because he remembered too well, and who had said 4 days ago that he was going to put something back there in the spring. "The account books will take at least 3 months to reconstruct properly," she said. "At least. And the restitution hearings will require documentation support for every claimant. That's months of work as well." "It is." "And someone will need to oversee the water assessment situation going forward, now that Southwestern Territorial is dissolved. There will be new county filings, and you'll need someone who knows what the legitimate documentation looks like to verify each one." "I'll need exactly that," Elias said, "for the foreseeable future." Clara looked at him for a long moment. The morning light held steady around them, and the street moved with its ordinary life. And somewhere in the courthouse behind them, a federal judge was writing orders that would change the shape of 4 families' futures. And it had started with a wrong seal on a document, and a woman who knew what the right seal looked like. "All right," she said. He reached into his coat pocket. She saw the motion before she understood it, and then he opened his hand and she saw the ring. Silver, simple, plain, with a warm glow of something old and kept carefully. He held it in his palm between them on the courthouse steps in the morning light, and he looked at her with the complete, unguarded directness of a man who had nothing left to hide behind and had decided that was all right. "That was my mother's," he said. "I have been carrying it for 4 days. I don't know exactly when I put it in my pocket. I think I knew before I knew." He paused. "Clara Whitfield, will you stay as my wife, as my partner, as the person who sees what I miss and who I will spend the rest of my life making sure is never left standing alone on any platform, anywhere?" She looked at the ring, looked at his face, at the sincerity in it, not performed, not polished, just true, the way the numbers in a correctly balanced ledger were true. She held out her hand. He placed the ring on her finger. It fit as though the silver had been waiting the specific shape of her hand all along. They stood for a moment on the steps, his hand around hers, the ring warm from his pocket. The courthouse behind them, and the street before them, and the whole county spread out under the Texas morning, washed clean and ordinary, and full of work still to be done. "The account books," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. "The ledgers won't reconstruct themselves." "Clara," he said her name the way he had learned to say it, without the miss, without the distance, just the name, like something that belonged to him now, and he to it. "Tomorrow." She looked at the ring on her finger, looked at the street where Marcus Dean was shaking Pete Shelby's hand, and Finch was already walking toward his office with the bearing of a man who had another letter to write. Looked at the sky over Harlan, blue and clear and wide, the kind of sky that went on and did not apologize for how much room it took up. "Tomorrow," she agreed. That October, Robert Finch's letter arrived at the Texas Bar Association 3 weeks before Clara Calhoun stood before a federal magistrate in Harlan and presented the restitution case for Pete Shelby's family land. The magistrate ruled in Pete's favor. The Shelby land was returned. Frances Alderman received a cash settlement that meant she would not spend the winter in her daughter's spare room. Marcus Dean's fraudulent charges were fully reimbursed with interest. Daniel Price was convicted of fraud in November and sentenced to 5 years. The investigation his conviction opened extended beyond Presidio County and took 2 years to complete. By the time it was finished, 11 separate land fraud schemes across 4 counties had been unwound, and the name Southwestern Territorial Holdings had become a shorthand in Texas legal circles for the particular kind of patient, methodical theft that counted on no one looking closely enough. Reginald Holt never went to prison. Men like Holt rarely did in that time and place. But he sold his Presidio County holdings the following spring at a loss, and he did not come back. And the county that had been bending slowly under his weight straightened up in the years that followed, and remembered what it felt like to stand on its own ground. Tom Aldis resigned from the Calhoun Ranch in October, as he had said he would. He left a letter on the kitchen table before dawn on the morning he rode out. Elias read it, and did not speak of its contents, and Clara did not ask. And the letter was placed in the box on the study shelf, where Elias kept things that mattered and were too complicated to simply put away. The roses went back on the porch railing in March, when the ground was ready. Not the same variety. Clara had chosen a climbing rose with white flowers, the kind that bloomed late and lasted into October, and she planted them herself on a Saturday morning while Elias rebuilt the fence on the south pasture. When he came back at noon and saw the new green along the railing, he stood on the porch steps for a long moment without speaking. Then he went inside and washed his hands for lunch. That was enough. They had both learned to read what the other one meant by silence. And what that silence meant was everything. In the evenings, when the work was done, and the accounts were balanced, and the ledgers were clean, and the cattle were watered, and the sky went orange and red over the western hills, they sat together on the porch in 2 chairs side by side, and watched the light change. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes Clara had a ledger in her lap, and Elias had a fence diagram, and they worked in the same companionable quiet they had first discovered at a kitchen table over fraudulent documents. The quiet of 2 people who had found in each other something they had not known they were looking for. A woman who had been thrown away like she was nothing, had looked at a wrong seal on a county document and refused to let it stand. A man who had been hollowed out by loss had picked up the other end of a trunk on a railway platform and changed the course of everything. Neither of them had known what they were doing in that moment. They had just done the next right thing, and the next, and the next, until the doing of right things had built something between them that was stronger than anything either of them could have constructed alone. The land was green again. The cattle were fat. The basin held water through the dry months, and the neighbors came to draw from it, as Elias had always intended, and no one was charged. The books balanced. Clara Calhoun had made sure of that.